Hello, everyone. I am so glad that you are here. Just let me know in the chat box if you came last night or if you missed last night, but you're coming today. And then just tell me what grade you teach and where you're from. Hey, Heather. Hey, Rita, welcome. Hey, Marianne, welcome back. Hello, I'm so glad that I see some faces coming back. Wisconsin, K5, yep, me too. All right, so we might have some more people come in. I'm also on Facebook. Kaylee McClayson is on here. So if you have questions, I cannot figure out how to allow you guys to send a message to everyone. I'm not sure if that's something that it probably is something that I'm doing on my end. But if you have a question that you need answered immediately, if you message her, she will help you out. Otherwise, throughout the webinar, what I'll do is I'll pause and I'll answer questions. I get super distracted by the chat box. And so I typically will minimize that so that I'm not distracted, and then I'll come back and I promise to answer everyone's questions. So if you were here last night, we were talking about the science of reading, what it is. We kind of got a good base on that. And then we talked about the journey that our readers take to become successful readers, and how sometimes we can fill in those gaps. And if we understand that route, then we can fill in those gaps as far as intervention goes. And so tonight we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about phonological awareness. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but then I'm going to talk about phonemic awareness, which falls under that umbrella. We're going to talk about some activities that you can do as far as phonemic awareness goes. We're also going to talk a little bit about the research, because I think that is important, and that is something that has been a pretty big topic here lately. So let's get started. So when we think about phonological awareness, you typically probably always see this umbrella term, and it's just an umbrella term to cover all topics. Okay. And it just kind of tells us everything that is covered under that umbrella. So we've got on the left side, we have rhyming, syllables, and word awareness. Those are the bigger components of our language of speech. And then on the right-hand side, we have phonemic awareness, which are those smaller units of sound. And so we're going to talk first about phonological awareness, and I'm going to share with you how I typically teach phonological awareness in our kindergarten classrooms and our preschool classrooms at the beginning of the year. So phonological awareness is the awareness that we have sounds in our words. And so we recognize that through identifying and producing rhyming words, counting syllables, and repeating words in sentences. So the first thing that we think about is that word awareness piece. And I also like to call this sentence segmentation, because we're really looking at that big unit, right? So there are 3 levels of phonological awareness in this word awareness piece. The first is repeating sentences. So students aren't always able to jump right to being able to tell you how many words are in a sentence. Sometimes, because of their working memory and because it's something new for them, then I like to say level 1 is just repeating the sentence. So I might say to the students, I like pizza. What's my sentence? And they repeat it back to me. I like pizza. I have little paper microphones that I use, and I'll put those on a popsicle stick, and they will pretend that we're Brittany, and we will repeat the sentences. The next thing then is that sentence segmentation piece. So that's going to be when our students are able to recognize that there are separate words in a sentence. And I might give them chips, and I might say, I like pizza. Let's push up 1 chip for each word in our sentence. So I like pizza. So they're starting to have that awareness of, okay, there are 3 words in this sentence. They're also starting to be aware of the fact that pizza is 1 word. And then the last level there is understanding the white space. So that's once they kind of get into text, they're understanding that where 1 word ends and the next word begins. So with rhyming, there are also 3 levels of rhyme, and I have them laid out here for you from easiest to hardest. So repeating the rhyme is the easiest for our children. So in preschool, when we're talking about rhyming words, I might say, okay, listen up, here's my rhyme. Cat, hat. Can you say that with me? Cat, hat. They sound the same. And then I might move into being able to identify the rhyme. So I might say, okay, I'm going to give you 3 words and there are going to be 2 that rhyme. So my words are cat, mat, cat, top. Which 2 words rhyme? And they're going to say cat and mat. And then the last and the highest level is being able to produce that rhyme. So that's being able to say to your students, my word is cat. Can you give me a word that rhymes with cat? And then we go into syllables, and there are 3 levels of syllables as well. So the first level is compound words. So if you want your students to be able to count the number of syllables in a word, they might not be able to do tornado right off the bat, right? So you might notice that they struggle with that. If they struggle with that, then you might have to go back to syllable blending or compound words. So I might say to my students, let's clap out the sounds we hear in the word football. Are you ready? Football. How many syllables in my word? 2. And then you might be able to say, okay, can you help me blend this syllable back together? So I'm going to say the word really slow, and I want you to say it really fast. And so then I might say to them, the word is tornado. What's my word? Tornado. And then they can move into the syllable segmentation piece, which is me saying to the students, my word is tornado. How many syllables do I have in the word tornado? And so when I think about phonological awareness, I think it's very important for us to understand, and I'm going to get a little bit into the research more when we talk about phonemic awareness, but I think there's a really huge misunderstanding with phonological awareness because we know that it's important. We know that our students need to have all of these components, but they don't have to have all of these components in order. And so I think sometimes what happens is we get caught up in these bigger units and we never make it to the smaller units. So what I like to do at the beginning of the year is I like to immerse my children and my students in these bigger phonological awareness skills. And so what I mean by that is we have slides that we use to talk about rhyming words, right? So they're identifying the rhyme, they're producing the rhyme, they're repeating the rhymes. We are talking about syllables, and I have whole group slides where we're talking about that as well. And something as simple as going back to their seat. I might have them stand up and I might say, I want you to take 1 step for each syllable you hear in my word. So my word is pizza. And so the students are going to take 2 steps, pizza, and they're going to walk their way back to their seat. I might say, if you are wearing purple, you may come to the carpet. If you are wearing a color that rhymes with tack, you may line up. And so I'm immersing them in this. I'm reading books that rhyme. I'm doing some whole group slides so that when we are learning our routines, especially in kindergarten, it takes a few weeks to learn those routines. And while we're doing that, before I put them into small group, I'm really just doing this repetitively. We're talking about how many words are in a sentence. We're talking about rhymes. We're talking about syllables, and we're doing it all the time. We're doing it at our morning meeting time. We're doing it during our transition times, and we're doing it so that when we are ready to put our students into that small group piece, they already have these bigger components under their belt and they're ready. And so, we're going to talk a little bit about the research behind that, but they don't have to have all of these. I still have kindergarten students who struggle to rhyme, but it is March now and I don't have time I am still going to support them, but I don't have time to wait to move on to the smaller parts of phonemic awareness, like blending and segmenting. So I have to continue to move on, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So let's talk about phonemic awareness. So phonemic awareness, we know, is the smaller unit, and it's the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate individual sounds and words. So when we think about phoneme blending is the ability for me to say a word, and I'm going to segment the word for the students, and they're going to blend it back together. So the word is pig. What's my word? Pig. So when we think about segmenting, that's the opposite. So I would say to the students, all right, boys and girls, my word is net. How many sounds do you hear in the word net? Can you help me sound it out? Net. So then we move into what is known as phoneme addition. So phoneme addition is when you give your students a word. You say top, and all of your students say top. And then you say top again, but add a s at the beginning. What word do you have? Stop. And deletion then is the opposite. So phoneme deletion is say clock. Now say clock, but don't say the k. What's the word? Lock. And then phoneme addition or phoneme substitution is when they are substituting phonemes. So say the word sank. Now say the word sink, but instead of s, say t. What is our word? Tank. So let's talk a little bit about the research, because I think it is very important for us to kind of dive into this a little bit and really understand what the National Reading Panel meant when they said we need to have phonemic awareness in our instruction. But before we do that, I want to stop and I want to see if we have any questions. I'm going to pull up the chat box. I'm going to pull that back up. I know there's a little bit of lag time, so Kaylee, if there's anything on Facebook, let me know. All right, so let's talk a little bit then about the research. So when we're thinking about the research, and I shared just a little bit of this briefly when we were talking about the phonological awareness piece. So you often see, just say yes in the chat box if you have seen this continuum of skills. You may even have mine. I just want to know if you guys have that. Okay, so a lot of us have seen this stair step image, right? And I think what happens, and this is what I was talking about when I was talking about, starting at the simple and moving to the more complex. I think what happens is a lot of us have seen this continuum of skills and we see the stair step. And so we think that we have to start at the bottom and we can't move on until our students have mastered whatever that skill is. And I used to think the same thing too. When I first started teaching and I was going into kindergarten classrooms, I was telling teachers like, no, they have to master rhyme. We have to get this down. And here we were in January and they were still rhyming. And looking back and knowing what I know now, I know that they don't really have to have rhyme to be able to blend and segment. But we do know that this continuum is here because kids do typically tend to master these larger units before they master the smaller units. But that does not mean that we can't be teaching blending and segmenting with our students and teaching those higher levels of phonemic awareness before they've mastered the others. So let's just talk a little bit about the research. So in 2000, the NRP, they examined the impact of phonemic awareness, and they did this in 52 research studies. And so what they found was that there were two main, very, very important components to phonemic awareness. And these important components were directly linked to reading and spelling. And those two components were blending and segmenting. And they found that when we explicitly teach our students how to integrate, we teach them not only to orally blend and segment, but when we teach them to integrate letters with the sounds that they're hearing, they saw even bigger effects and larger outcomes with their students. And so I think that it is important to really think about that. So we know that they don't have to it doesn't have to be the stair step. They don't have to master those bigger units before moving on to the smaller units. And we also know that we want to make sure that we are in alignment. And what I mean by that is, if we are teaching short A, for example, and that is our phonics lesson, we don't want to use a phonemic awareness warm-up that has short O or blends or well, we could use digraphs if it's short A, but we want to connect it and we want it to align as closely as possible. So what you'll see here is I have just a sample of a phonics lesson that I use, and you'll see in the green, there is the phonemic awareness warm-up. And so you'll notice that I'm only doing blending and segmenting in this warm-up because I know it is what my kiddos need to be strong readers and strong spellers. And so I know that the NRP says they're very clear that those are the two components that really kind of move our students forward. So I'm using those two skills, but I'm also, you'll notice that I have a phonemic awareness warm-up. And if I were to zoom in on this phonemic awareness warm-up, you would see that there are two skills being covered. And those two skills being covered are the blending and the segmenting piece. And I'm aligning it. So if I'm teaching short A, which I am in this lesson, then the phonemic awareness warm-up that I'm doing is also a short A lesson. Now, we also know when students are doing, when they're first starting like CVC words, we want to make it fun, right? So I love throwing in activities like this Ask By Mat, and this Ask By Mat will be one of the downloads that I send to you guys after this workshop. But what we do is I say to the students, okay, my word is what's my word? And I'll give them little magnifying glasses and they have to find the word map. So that's just one activity that we can do. It doesn't have to take a ton of time, and it doesn't have to be anything elaborate. You can lay out some pop-its and have your students pop the sounds that they hear. You can give them today. I gave my students, I don't think I have one here with me, but I gave my students a race car, and I had them segment. So if the word was tap, they would segment and then they would race their car and say tap. I also have some other things that I love to do for phonemic awareness. And this is something that is super, super simple. So this is just a pipe cleaner, and I have the beads. And what I will do is just have them push them all the way to the left. And this may be backwards on the computer. And I might say, okay, the word is map. Ready? What's the word? Map. You can do that with your pipe cleaners. Here, I do have a car. There's a car. I have the magnetic wands that I will use for the Ask By Mats. In Halloween, I will get these little spiders, and that's what I'll use. I'll have them push up one little spider for each sound that they hear. Foam cubes are great. They're easy for kiddos to kind of get a hold of, and especially when they're still working on those fine motor skills. So those are great. I love those. I have letter tiles that I use as well. So there are all kinds of manipulatives that you can use, especially early on as students are learning to kind of put all of this together. So you have to remember that those manipulatives are a scaffold for our students. They are there to support them. And I typically, beyond blends, will not use a ton of manipulatives. Now, manipulatives that I use all the time are these letter tiles. I use those all the time. But, I try to use it they're few and far between, because really what we're doing is the phonemic awareness warm-ups need to be quick so that we can get into our phonics instruction, which brings me to the next slide that I want to share with you guys. And that is, the NRP also says that we need to be applying our phonemic awareness skills, our blending and segmenting, to letters as soon as possible. And so I highlighted these three. These are my three favorite activities. And I'm not going to go too far into these because next week when we talk about phonics, I'm going to share some of these activities with you. But these are easy ways that you can incorporate phonemic awareness and phonics. So yes, once we add print, it is technically phonics, but that doesn't mean that we're not still practicing phonemic awareness skills. So if you'll look at the segment and write board, what I'll do is I will give students some chips or counters or whatever I'm using. I will have them put those in the bottom box, and then they're just going to slide up. So if the word is tap, we're going to push up one sound for each, one tile for each sound that we hear. So t, a, p. And then I want to apply the phonics piece. So what I'm going to ask them to do then is to write the corresponding letters underneath those sounds. So we're pulling in the phoneme, the grapheme, we're putting it together. So it's a phonics activity, but we are practicing blending and segmenting. And the same thing for this tap it, map it, write it. This is that great for older kids, like first, second grade. They have several ones that we can dictate to them. And so I might say to them, okay, the word is mop. Let's tap out. How many sounds do we hear in the word mop? So they're going to go, mop. And then I'm going to have them take their expo marker. They're going to go ahead and map out how many sounds they hear. So they're going to draw that outline of those 3 boxes, and then they're going to write the word mop. So we are still doing phonemic awareness, but we're tying in the letters. And probably one of my favorite activities to do is this word chaining activity. You can do it. I like to use these magnetic letters here, but you can also just have them write it. But what I like to do is I will have them build words. And so they're building words, but they're only changing one sound at a time. So I might say, pull the letters that you need to spell the word cat, cat. And then I'm going to say to them, change one sound to make the new word cap. So they're going to have to, now they're working on those higher levels of phonemic awareness, but we are building a stronger connection because we are adding in the print. And so they will have to take away the T, replace it with a P, and then I'm going to have them push. So now they are segmenting, they're pushing those letters up, and they're going to say the whole word. They're blending, and they're going to say cap. So just in that word chaining activity, you're hitting all of those higher levels of the phonemic awareness piece, but you're adding letters. So I'm going to stop. I see some messages in the chat. And then we will wrap up. Okay. That was just someone saying they were moving over to Facebook. Are there any questions about these 3 activities? I'm really going to deep dive into these when we talk about phonics next week, but if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat box now. All right, so let's do some troubleshooting. Oh, hold on, here's a question. I know there's a little bit of a lag time. I have a couple of students that know their letter sounds in isolation, but as soon as letters come together as a word, sounds are forgotten and guessing takes place. They are great at hearing and identifying the word when I sound a word out, but they struggle when they struggle when they don't have the support. Okay, so there are a couple things going on here. So the question is, I'm going to recap it, that she has a couple of students who know their letter sounds in isolation, but as soon as letters come together in a word, so as soon as we start to apply it to the phonemic awareness piece, the blending and the segmenting, their sounds are forgotten and they are starting to struggle. So they're just guessing the word. And I'm going to go ahead and switch over to this next slide because I do have, this is a great segue into what we are going to talk about. So sometimes when students are just starting to learn letters, when they've learned their letter sounds and they've learned how to orally blend and segment, and you're starting to put it together, sometimes they struggle. And sometimes they struggle because we have found that even though our students know their letter sounds, they're not super automatic with them. And so that might trip them up. So they're having to use so much of their cognitive, there's so much cognitive load there trying to figure out what the sound is, that they are forgetting by the time they get to the end of the word. And so a couple things that you can do. Number one is if you think they're ready for segmenting, then you can knock it back to 2 sounds. And so you could say, okay, my word is ab, and have them read from the vowel and then that final consonant. And so also, I think it's really important to think about, and this is something that I didn't know when I first started teaching, but vowel sounds, when we do vowel sounds and we review vowel sounds, we're saying a, eh. We're saying them quickly, but they're actually continuous sounds. So A is actually a, E is actually I is actually and so on. And so if we teach our students from the beginning that those aren't stop sounds, they're continuous sounds, then when they're looking at a word like ab, they're going to blend them together that way. They're going to say ab. So that's one thing that you can do. Another thing you can do is you can do something called successive blending. And I have some successive blending sheets, and I'll see if I can switch over my camera here at the end, and I'll show you what those look like. But that's another thing you can do. So essentially with the successive blending, you're having your students say one sound at a time. So think of like a pyramid. So if the word is bat, they're saying at, bat. And so sometimes they can't hang on to all of those sounds. And so that's where the guessing starts to kind of take place. Does that help? All right, and so that kind of covered the first question. So students can't, one of these questions, not the first one. Another thing that we see is that students just can't blend words orally. So students might say, I might say, okay, the word is, what's my word? And they all say something crazy like monkey. I don't know. They say something crazy. And so what happens is they just can't hear those individual sounds yet. And so what you have to do is you have to think back to that. I'll go back and show you. If you have students that are struggling and they can't blend at the individual level, then you kind of have to go back to this continuum of skills and you say, okay, here's where I am. Right now, I'm at that individual phoneme level. I'm asking them to blend words at the individual phoneme level. They can't do it. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, okay, can they blend at the onset rhyme level? Now, this isn't forever. This is just a scaffold because they just might need that larger unit to get over the hump. So instead of saying at, I'm now saying at. What word did I say? Cat. Some students won't be able to do that. And so then you have to go back to the syllable level and say, okay, my word is pumpkin. What's my word? Pumpkin. And if they aren't able to do that, then you kind of have to go all the way back. Remember those 3 levels of syllables? Go back to compound words. Okay, my word is football. What's my word? Football. So you do that over and over and over again. Then you move back to regular syllables. Then you move into the onset rhyme blending, and then you can go back to the phoneme blending at the individual level. All right. Let's see. Okay. All right, so my students can segment words orally, but they struggle to say the entire word. And we kind of talked about that because that was the question from over on Facebook. And then another thing that we notice that students have a hard time doing is they can sound them out correctly, but then they say a different word. So the second and the third are kind of the same, but if they struggle to segment words orally and then say the entire word, really think about that successive blending. And I'm going to try to quickly turn on my camera so I can show you what that looks like. And while I'm doing that, are there any questions? right, maybe if I stop sharing, I'll be able to share without having to turn my my document camera on. Give me just a second and I will pull those out for you guys. All right, let's see if I can get them. All right, so here they are. And I'll see if I can make them a little bigger maybe so you guys can see it just a little bit better. Okay, now I'll share it a little bit bigger with you guys. Well, it doesn't want to share that way. Okay, I'm not going to share it. I'll share it like this. I think you guys can see if I'm the only one talking, it should be, if you adjust your view, you should be able to see it. So this is the successive blending. So they start here and they will say b, b, am, bam, am, ram. And so something else to think about, and if you, this is week 1 of my letter sound curriculum. And something to really think about is that also when we are teaching our students to blend and segment for the first time, using continuous sounds is easier for our students. So M is not a letter, or B and M and R and S may not be a high frequency on, not all of them are high frequency on high utility on a letter sound curriculum, but I like to start with those because I feel like we're pulling in letter sounds, we're pulling in the blending and segmenting, and they just need a minute to breathe. And so I tried really hard when I did this curriculum to make sure that that first week gave them lots and lots of practice, and they had lots of practice with continuous sounds. So that ends with the sound, right? And so we practice that blending that way. So I hope that helps. I'm going to look and see if there are any other questions. Can we see the staircase? Can we send the staircase with people? I'm not sure what that means. Do you want me to send that out with our with the downloads? Because I can. Oh yes. Okay. Yes, I can send it out to people. I got you. That's okay. That's all right. Yes. So I'm going to make a note because that was not on the downloads, but I'm happy to send that out. So let me write that down. So I'm going to send out the continuum to you guys too. Just remember when I send that out, it's not, we start at the bottom and work our way to the top. It's just a guide so that if your students are struggling, you can kind of backtrack and figure out where they're struggling and kind of help them fill those gaps. Okay, so there's a question about the difference between Facebook Live or through Zoom. You can choose. So if you're on Facebook, it's the same. You can just hop on in the Facebook group and you can be and get the same live stream as you're getting here on Zoom. I just wanted to give people options because not everyone is on Facebook. No, everyone cannot see the messages that you're sending. It is you're sending them as direct messages, and I'm not sure what setting I've clicked to make that happen, but I will look at that for next week. Yes, so another question is we have, I really have students who struggle with the A sound when it's with the M and the N. And so I talk about how M and N do not like to share, and they do not like to be in line with A. And we talk about how sometimes when we line up in kindergarten, we don't like to be in line with people either. We don't want Johnny to be in front of us. We want to be in line with our friends. But sometimes that's just the way it is. And so I tell my students, sometimes we get frustrated. We might cross our arms like this, and we might tuck our head down, and we might scrunch our face up. And that's kind of what A does when it gets beside M or N. It gets a little bit whiny because it doesn't want to be in line with them. So I might say, so it says instead of its sound, which is ah. And kids can relate to that, right? Because kindergarten especially, they whine, they get frustrated, and so they can really relate to that. And so I call it the whiny A, and I'm not sure, I didn't create that. I read that somewhere and I thought that was a really great idea. And so I just talked to them about that, and I just say it does like to be in line with A does like to be in line with M or N, and when it is, it crosses its arm, it scrunches its face, and it whines a little bit, so it makes a little bit of a different sound. And that's all they need. I mean, I've never had a student after telling them that it didn't stick and they didn't remember that it just makes a little bit of a different sound. All right. Yes, Amy, it is recorded. So I didn't want to overwhelm you guys with emails. And so after tonight, tomorrow, I will send out the email of the recording from yesterday and today, both in the same email with the handout. So you'll have everything from this week's series all together. And then next week, I'll do the same thing. All right. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. Oh, here's a couple. I know there's a little bit of a lag time. Can you explain the difference between onset rhyme blending and phoneme blending? So onset rhyme blending is when you say the first sound and then the rest of the word. So if the word is cat, you say k, and then the rhyme, R-I-M-E, is the A-T sound. And so k, at. So it's 2 word parts instead of 3. With the word ship, for example, the onset would be sh, and the rhyme would be ip. And so it's just a step back. And so if you're thinking about helping your students blend these words together, which is easier, to hold on to all 3 sounds, k, at, or to hold on to 2 sounds, k, at. We don't want them to stay there long. It's just a scaffold to get them to the individual phoneme level. Does that help, Logan? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. Next week, our series is going to be, we're going to talk about phonics. I'm going to share a little bit about letter sounds, and then we're going to move into how we can turn those letter sounds into phonics. And then I'm going to share with you a decodable lesson. So how you can choose decodables and how you can implement them, and some things that you should do as you are working through decodables with your students. So that is what that's what the 2 webinars will be next week, and they will be Wednesday and Thursday. And I did not send out the bonus downloads. I am going to send those out. I will send them out tomorrow when I send out the recording. So I'll send all of that out with it. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you. I'll stay on for just a few minutes if there are any other questions. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Hillary. All right, you guys have a great night.